The auctioneer barely looked at the 85th mule. Nobody's bidding. Silence. The animal stood at the back of the livestock pen with her head lowered, one hind leg resting lightly on the ground. Her ribs showed beneath a dusty brown coat. A faded scar crossed her shoulder. The auctioneer sighed. Last chance. Mara Whitaker raised her hand. The entire barn turned toward her. The auctioneer blinked. You're bidding? Yes. For this one? Yes. A rancher near the front laughed. Lady, that mule can barely stand. Mara didn't look at him. Then I'll help her stand. The auctioneer shook his head. Sold. That was how Mara bought the first of 85 mules nobody else wanted. Mara was 31, a single mother who owned a neglected 60-acre orchard outside Mercy Creek. Her apple and peach trees had once produced enough fruit to support the farm. Not anymore. For nearly 5 years, the orchard had declined. The soil was hard. The understory was choked with weeds. Branches grew without pruning. Wild vines climbed the trunks. And the trees that still bloomed produced very little fruit. Mara couldn't afford a full-time orchard crew. Her tractor was old. Her irrigation system leaked. And every season seemed to bring another expense. So when she heard that a nearby ranch was liquidating a group of unwanted mules, she went to the auction expecting to buy none. Then she saw them. 85 animals. Some were old. Some had chronic injuries. Some had poor feet. Others had been overworked and simply needed rehabilitation. None were suitable for the demanding ranch work buyers wanted. But Mara noticed something else. They were calm, strong-bodied beneath the neglect, and remarkably sure-footed. She started thinking about her orchard. The idea sounded ridiculous. Nathan Briggs told her so. You bought 85 mules. Mara nodded. Yes. Why? They can work. Nathan stared at the trailer. Those animals? Eventually. How eventually? Mara smiled. Give me time. He shook his head. We don't have enough stalls. I know. Not enough feed storage. I know. Not enough fencing. I know. Nathan looked at her. Then what exactly do we have? Mara looked toward the orchard. A problem they might be able to solve. The mules arrived at sunset. Mara didn't put them to work. She gave them water, feed, shelter, and time. A veterinarian examined the herd. The animals were separated according to their condition. Those needing the most rest went into quiet paddocks. Others received hoof care and gradual conditioning. Mara learned their individual personalities. One mule kicked whenever someone approached from behind. Another hated buckets. A small gray mule followed Mara everywhere. Lily named him Dusty. Within 2 weeks, the animals were already changing. Their coats improved. Their energy returned. They began moving comfortably across the pasture. But Mara still hadn't solved the orchard. One morning, she walked through the dead rows with Nathan. We need to clear the understory. Nathan pointed toward the thick weeds. The tractor can't get through there. We need to move fallen branches too. Workers would take weeks. Mara looked toward the pasture, then toward the orchard. What if the mules did some of it? Nathan frowned. Doing what? Hauling. That was the first experiment. Mara fitted a lightweight pack harness to one of the calmer mules. She attached a small load of fallen branches. The mule walked. No struggle. No panic. Just steady movement. Nathan stared. Well, Mara smiled. Exactly. Soon, the mules were doing controlled work. They hauled branches from between the trees, moved compost, carried tools, pulled small carts, transported water to distant sections. They could navigate narrow rows where machinery couldn't, and their hooves disturbed far less soil than the tractor. But Mara noticed something else. The orchard floor was changing. Where the mules traveled repeatedly, dense weeds were being broken down. Their manure returned nutrients to the soil. The ground became easier to work. Mara began composting the manure with leaves and old fruit. Nothing was wasted. The neighbors still laughed. Earl Dawson leaned over the fence one afternoon. You really think 85 mules are going to save an orchard? Mara kept working. No. Earl smiled. Good. Mara looked up. I think the mules are going to help me save it. His smile disappeared. You actually have a plan? I do. She pointed toward the orchard. First we clear it. Then we fix the soil. And after that, we bring the trees back. Earl shook his head. Those trees haven't produced properly in years. Mara smiled. Then maybe they've been waiting for us to stop making things worse. The first winter was difficult. Several mules developed problems that required additional veterinary care. Feed costs increased. Mara questioned the decision more than once. One night, she sat at the kitchen table with unpaid invoices spread around her. Nathan entered. "You all right?" Mara stared at the numbers. "I don't know. Want me to say we should sell them?" She looked up. "No. Then what?" "I'm trying to figure out how to make this work." Nathan nodded. "We'll figure it out." By spring, the orchard looked different. The weeds were under control. Dead branches had been removed. Compost had been spread. Water lines were repaired. Mara pruned the trees carefully. The mules helped haul everything. Then one morning, Lily came running into the house. "Mom!" Mara rushed outside. "What happened? Come see." They ran toward the orchard. Lily stopped beneath an old apple tree. There, hidden among the new leaves, were tiny white blossoms. Mara stared. The tree had barely bloomed in years. Nathan arrived moments later. He looked up. "That's impossible." Mara smiled. "No." She touched one of the branches. "It's just early." The blossoms spread. One tree, then another, then dozens. By the end of spring, the dead orchard was covered in white and pink. Bees returned. Birds nested in the branches. The soil beneath the trees was dark and loose. And the 85 mules grazed peacefully beyond the orchard fence. Mara stood among the blossoms, staring upward. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a harvest. But there was still one problem. Flowers weren't fruit. The trees could bloom beautifully and still fail. Mara would have to wait. And as summer approached, the entire orchard would face its biggest test yet, whether the neglected trees had truly recovered enough to carry a harvest. The blossoms lasted nearly 3 weeks. Every morning, Mara walked through the orchard counting them. Not because she needed an exact number, because she couldn't believe they were there. For years, the trees had looked exhausted. Now the branches were covered in white and pink flowers. Bees moved between the rows. Birds nested in the restored trees. And beneath them, the soil was dark and soft. But Mara knew better than to celebrate too early. A blossom was only a promise. The real test would come after the petals fell. By June, tiny green fruit had appeared. At first, there were only a few. Then dozens. Then hundreds. Mara stood beneath an old peach tree and stared at clusters of small fruit hanging from branches that had produced almost nothing the year before. Nathan walked up behind her. "That's more than I've seen on this tree in 5 years." Mara smiled. "Don't touch anything." "I wasn't going to." "You were thinking about it." Nathan laughed. "Maybe." The mules continued their work. They hauled compost between the rows, moved fallen branches, carried water tanks, pulled small carts loaded with harvested weeds. But Mara noticed another benefit. Their manure was becoming valuable. She began mixing it with leaves, grass clippings, and orchard waste. The compost pile grew. By midsummer, she had rich organic material ready to return to the soil. Nothing from the farm was simply thrown away anymore. The mules ate. They worked. They fertilized. And the orchard gave back. Then the drought arrived. Rain stopped for nearly 3 weeks. Farmers across the county watched their fields dry. Mara's orchard was vulnerable. Fruit trees require water at critical stages, and her repaired irrigation system couldn't supply everything indefinitely. Nathan checked the reservoir. "We've got enough for maybe 10 days. Mara looked toward the hills. "Then we make it count." She prioritized the youngest trees and the most productive sections. The mules helped carry water tanks into areas the old tractor couldn't reach easily. Every morning, workers moved through the rows. Every evening, they repeated the process. The work was exhausting, but the trees survived. Then the rain came. A violent summer storm swept across the county. Water rushed down the hillside. Mara worried about erosion. But the soil held. The compost had improved its structure. Ground cover slowed the runoff. Roots anchored the soil. The orchard absorbed much of the rain instead of losing it. Nathan stood in the doorway of the barn watching the storm. That could have been bad. Mara nodded. But it wasn't. August brought the first real harvest. Mara picked one apple from an old tree. She turned it over. Perfect skin. Firm flesh. She took a bite. Nathan watched. "Well," Mara smiled. "Sweet." He laughed. "That's a good sign." They began harvesting. Boxes filled. Then more boxes. Peaches followed. Then pears. The orchard that everyone had called dead was suddenly producing again. Not a miracle harvest. Not enough to make Mara wealthy overnight. But enough to make the farm profitable. And more importantly, enough to prove the trees weren't finished. Earl Dawson arrived with his pickup truck. He stepped out and stared at the rows. What happened here? Mara smiled. Work. He looked toward the pasture. The 85 mules were grazing peacefully. Those animals? They helped. Earl shook his head. I thought you were crazy. You weren't the only one. He picked up an apple from a nearby crate. How much did you harvest? Mara told him. Earl whistled. That's more than the orchard produced when your father ran it. Mara nodded. Almost. He looked toward the trees. Your father would be proud. Mara became quiet. She hadn't expected that. After a moment, she smiled. I hope so. The story spread. People who had laughed at Mara began asking questions. How did she rehabilitate the orchard? Why did she buy so many mules? How did she afford to keep them? Mara explained that the mules weren't magic. They were simply well suited to certain jobs. They could navigate narrow spaces. They could haul materials. They could work on uneven ground. And once properly cared for, animals that others considered useless could become productive partners. But Mara always emphasized one thing. The orchard wasn't saved by the mules alone. She pointed toward the soil. We fixed the whole system. That fall, Mara began offering guided demonstrations for nearby farmers. She showed them how the mules were conditioned, how their loads were limited, how their feet were monitored, how the orchard was divided into work zones. She also showed the compost system, the irrigation repairs, the soil improvements, and the pruning plan. Several farmers began asking about buying mules that other ranchers considered unfit for heavy work. Mara connected them with responsible rescue organizations. She never encouraged people to purchase injured animals simply because they were cheap. Take an animal only if you're prepared to care for it properly. That became her rule. 1 year after the auction, Mara returned to the same livestock sale. This time, she wasn't there to buy 85 unwanted mules. She was there to speak. The auctioneer recognized her. He smiled. Back again. Just visiting. He looked toward the pens. How are your mules? Mara smiled. Healthy. All 85. All 85. The auctioneer shook his head. I still can't believe you took that whole group. Mara laughed. Neither can I. Back home, the orchard was glowing under autumn sunlight. The trees had grown stronger. The soil was healthier. The irrigation system worked. And the mules had become part of the farm's daily rhythm. Dusty, the little gray mule Lily had named, followed her daughter along the fence. Lily carried a basket of apples. Dusty tried to steal one. Hey! Lily laughed and pulled it away. Mara watched from the barn. For years, she had thought saving the orchard meant finding enough money to replace everything that was broken. Instead, she had discovered that some solutions were already available. They simply looked different. The mules weren't worthless. The orchard wasn't dead. And the land hadn't forgotten how to grow. It had needed someone willing to see what remained. That winter, Mara hung a photograph in the farmhouse. It showed 85 neglected mules standing in an auction pen. Their ribs visible, their coats dull, their heads lowered. Beside it, she placed another photograph. The same animals, 1 year later. Healthy, strong, standing in a green pasture beside an orchard overflowing with fruit. Lily looked at the pictures. Mom, yeah. Which one do you like better? Mara smiled. The second. Me too. She looked at the first photograph again. But I'm glad we have both. Why? Because the first one reminds me that sometimes something can look finished when it isn't.